everybody, welcome to Rock and Roll Shin-Soo Choo, episode number 99. Glad you're with us here. My name is Gabe. I'm here with my co-hosts, Dennis Levi Leach and Jonathan Getz. How's it going, fellas?
Great.
99 feeling fine.
Good deal. All right, well, we got 99 problems, but and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is one of them. All right, so for those of you who haven't heard a previous episode tonight, a previous episode like the one tonight, we're going to do tonight something really fun and special. Is we induct artists into our own version of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We call this the Choo-Ins. Okay, so like shoe-ins, as you could probably guess. I think this is our fifth class, I believe, guys, of the Rock and Roll of the Shoe-Ins. So I believe this is the class of 2019 is class number 5. And I'll give everybody a little bit of preface for this. These are artists that we feel like deserve more recognition. And even though they might be popular artists, they will probably, and I say probably, never be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, just given, some of the choices that we've seen over the years. But, never say never. But most of these artists, none of them are in right now. Let's just say that. Every single person we've inducted has never been nominated for the actual Hall of Fame, and that's the same, obviously, for this year's class as well. So I think really go ahead, yeah.
Do you think that, given how record sales have changed, these achievements and going platinum or gold or whatever,
right,
just aren't as common anymore? How do you foresee the induction, the nominated bands moving, in that you won't have these obvious behemoth bands that sold millions and millions and millions, tens of millions of records?
Yeah, I think that'll change. I think right now the bands still get inducted for the most part have sold a lot of records. Now, it's not true for everybody. They also induct some people on, sort of critical merits.
They're kind of veterans committee that they have.
Right, yeah. And we've talked about this before. It's obviously while it's fun to watch some of the induction ceremonies when they're on HBO and to watch, some of our favorite artists play together. And it's cool to see some of these acts recognized. There's always been this kind of gatekeeper mentality, that governs a lot of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Like, oh, I say this one's okay, but not this one, this new age band is fine, but this rock band that was popular, no, not at all. So I've always had a lot of issues around that. It's like a lot of, what is his name, Jan Werner and his friends kind of, picking and choosing who gets into this thing.
Yeah. It is
so
pretty secretive, the voting, right?
Yeah. So I think that's going to change. I think you're right. I mean, I don't know if that'll happen anytime soon because, right now there's bands just aren't selling records like they used to, and that won't certainly change anytime soon. But yeah, you'll.
Well, honestly, oh, sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay.
I think where it is going to lead to, it's going to lead to like artists based off their merits of like views, downloads,
YouTube,
right?
Instagram,
ticket sales. Yeah,
those are the new metrics.
Exactly. They're going to have to somehow. And, like you said, they're still picking pretty popular acts that sold lots of records. But like at some point, they're going to run out, and they're not going. They're going to have to adjust to those metrics that the music industry is now based on.
Yeah, I don't know. Like all these SoundCloud rappers might go in the Hall of Fame in 25 years. I don't know.
Old Town Road.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know. Now I look at I was talking a little bit about some of the artists that they've welcomed, they've inducted in recent years, and I'm glad to see it. I'll give you a couple examples, and they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. But within the last couple of years, I believe Boston got nominated, right, or got inducted, and Journey got inducted. A lot of critics kind of always thumb their noses at those bands, even back when those bands were popular in the late 70s, right? So I personally I like to see those bands get recognized because I think they deserve it. I think, I obviously selling records isn't everything, but they also influenced a lot of people as well. Like, who didn't have the first Boston record? I'd imagine every single person who's a guitarist who we respect probably enjoyed the first Boston album at one point in their lives, especially if they're people that are like anywhere from 10 to 15 years older than us.
Well, and those first few Journey records with Steve Perry, those were hugely influential.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? As far as
Absolutely.
like moving the ballad rock scene forward.
AOR radio, man. They practically created it, So I like to see it. I'm all those ones like I think Styx should be in. All right, I'll stand by that. So and Kansas, and so now that they're recognizing those bands, who were popular, but never had the critical acclaim. You could also say the same about my favorite band, with Kiss being inducted a few years ago. Kiss has been eligible since like the year 2000. Maybe even before that. I think like Kiss has been eligible since like 99, if you go by like the 25 year after the first record.
Sure.
But they didn't get in until like 2014 or something like that. Because it's just snobbery. That's what it was. They kept him out.
Yeah.
I mean, say what you will about Gene, he's a fucking douchebag, but I mean, like, that's we're not putting people in there because they're nice people.
No, they changed the game, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're like they're pioneers of like marketing in rock music.
And that's why
they should have been in like first ballot just for that.
Yeah, because some critics that think Elvis Costello and David Bowie are the end all be all of music don't like Kiss. Well, and for the record, I love David Bowie and Elvis Costello.
No, yeah,
there's room in my heart for a wide spectrum of people. That's what both of you know. But I think just this whole gatekeeper thing is what kept a lot of bands out, and it seems like that's starting to break up now. And I mentioned Journey, another band, and this is a band that's critically acclaimed, but except for maybe in Britain, I don't have the figures in front of me. I mean, how many like classic rock radio fans do you know that are like, oh yeah, I was listening to Roxy Music the other day? I mean, like WYMG doesn't play rock. It's a Springfield reference there for everyone not from Central Illinois listening. It's your typical classic FM hits radio, classic rock radio. Roxy Music got in last year, which I think is great. I mean, they're pioneering and their albums are great, but that goes to show you that it's not always going to be about record sales. I mean, fuck, the Ramones didn't sell a lot of records. They got it a long time ago.
Sure.
So.
But it just takes longer to recognize them, and
yeah, it does.
But yeah, it'll be fascinating when they don't have those metrics to really lean on.
Right.
Like, how do you determine this? Like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so it's record sales or its influence. So yeah, I'm hopeful because we'll segue here to our show. I started thinking about some of the first artists that came to mind for me. I hesitated because I think that it's possible they might get in within the next few years. Like somebody like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, is not in, but could very well be.
On the fringe.
On the fringe. Maybe like Jethro Tull as well. Even the band I saw this weekend, I thought about Fish as well. I think from a live standpoint, I don't really think you can deny how popular.
I think they get in.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
It's crazy that Jethro Tull's not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
I know. Yeah. No, I mean, look how long it took Yes. Yes just got in 3 years ago, same year as Pearl Jam. Yeah. So yeah. They're not always good at recognizing, prog and as a genre, and metal as well. Like the fact that Iron Maiden's not in, I think is just a crime. Mm-hmm. You look at how much of a live juggernaut they are now. I mean, it's one of the most popular live rock and roll bands in the world.
Actually, is the fact that Iron Maiden isn't in? Is that an indication that it might be hard for Fish to get in?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, the Grateful Dead got in when like Jerry Garcia was still alive. Yeah.
And they got in when like they were allowing you to be like, oh, this guy played keyboards with us for 2 weeks. His name gets on the plaque.
Yeah, well,
which they stopped doing.
Yes,
now.
they did.
And he wasn't in the band for 2 weeks, but a guy who was a member of the Grateful Dead is also in a band that I'm going to induct as a Choo-In tonight.
Yes.
So yes. But anyway, guys, before we get it, you guys maybe have your own criteria for our Choo-Ins now. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame rant over. Mine has always been, and there are a couple exceptions to this, but with the people I've inducted, it's always been like they got to have 3 great albums to me. That's always been my own personal criteria. Now, I think there are some bands in the actual Rock and Roll Hall of Fame who deserve the acclaim that don't have 3 great albums, in my opinion. I'll give you 2 that have been inducted maybe within the last 10 years: NWA and Guns N' Roses, right? I don't think
Sex Pistols in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
I think they might be.
You could argue they have 1 good record.
Right, and that's really all they did. You know, I mean, they've only got 1 real record. You know, 1 real LP. And NWA, you know, has 2 LPs and an EP. 1 LP a classic. The EP and the other LP are good, but not anywhere near the first one. And then Guns N' Roses, you know, I mean, obviously, I like Use Your Illusion, but I find it to be a little bloated compared to how lean Appetite is. But anyway, so I always need 3 good albums, 3 great albums, and I've been able to match that criteria with all of the acts I've inducted. So I don't know if you guys have your own criteria that you've sorted out, or is it just sort of somebody that you're keen on lately, or somebody who maybe you think is important and deserves more recognition?
Yeah, I would say in my aspect, it's someone that I think not a lot of people maybe know about or realize, and then also it's got to be music that I enjoy.
Sure. Well, yeah, right.
And other than that, I think the thing with me mainly is like someone that people haven't maybe heard as much of ever. Is what is usually one of my guiding principles of it. Like someone that I think, you know, and I do look at the record sales and things like that, and I take into account like influence, how they've influenced people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I would say that's kind of where mine comes out of.
Yeah.
I agree with those points. Though, and you'll find out with my induction, I really didn't lean on the studio work so much as the live repertoire. Though their studio albums are very good. I don't know if I consider any of them great, like on par with you know my favorite studio work. But overall, the not necessarily the influence of the members, but the impact that the band had as a live force, you know, who they worked with, who was brought into their circle, and the consistency and longevity for which they were able to achieve those, you know, great heights of musicianship. And for me, it's a band that I'll just keep going back to, you know, 20 years later. Yeah. And those are in addition to what you guys have already said.
Yeah. You know, the last band I inducted last year, Fairport Convention, that's a band that came to me a little bit later. And tonight's inductee, I would say, would be the same case. You know, I wasn't listening to this band in high school. Same thing, like I wasn't listening to Fairport Convention in high school. I'd have been pretty fucking cool if I was.
You'd have had zero friends.
Probably totally an outcast though as well. But yeah, so these bands I've sort of recognized their influence at a later stage in my life. They weren't necessarily bands I listened to growing up. The last year's inducting this one. You know, one last thing as well before we get into our picks, you know, about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Sorry, I'll just jump back for 1 second. There's one other point I wanted to get in. I don't like these arguments that are like, well, what they putting the rap music in there for? You know, like fuck that. You know, like rap is rock and roll. You know, it is. Pop music
is rock and roll.
Yes, pop music is rock and roll.
Yep.
Now, if you want to change the name of the place and call it the Hall of Fame of pop music, fine, whatever. But I don't buy it. Sorry, because I feel like I see a lot of like old rock people, like, I don't know, your person that listens to WYMG. Like, what the hell's Madonna doing in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Like, she's an icon who's made, music that maybe you don't like, but is really important,
Sure. And maybe someday you'll appreciate it.
And maybe someday you'll appreciate it. Yeah. And I like Madge, as you guys know. I've stated that before on the show. So, but yeah, so I don't buy that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't buy that. Like, it's got to be people playing guitars. I don't.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty short-sighted to think that way, because then you're gonna like start to set rules. Like,
yeah. You gonna ignore everybody that was in Motown, Like, I mean, granted, like of singers,
Yeah.
Sure.
Like, come on. Yeah. So I'm not buying that. So, that said, let's start. Let's just go ahead and get into our inductees, guys. Again, everybody, before we get in, if you want to check out our previous inductees, we'll post a list of them when we start to promote this episode. But you can check back in the archives at rockchew.com. To see the previous classes of inductees.
I think they've all come in around July. I think.
Yeah, they're usually summer. Episodes. We usually try to dovetail this with usually the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremony airing right
and
around
the
there.
MLB ceremony.
And the MLB ceremony as well. So that's kind of how this came to fruition. So cool. Well, you know what, Levi, this was a really good one, and I'm obviously, I love hosting the show with you guys. I'm always impressed with your choices, and they always really resonate with me. But Levi, I think you've got a great choice, and I think you should tell us about it.
Well, and the name of my group begins with the letter A, so it's
right.
The
there we go.
Of the alphabet. There we go. The group that I am inducting this year in 2019 into the Choo Hall of Fame, the Choo-Ins, as we say, is the Average White Band. And for those of you that don't know, the Average White Band were a group of guys from Scotland who played funk music in America.
The capital
in the 70s,
funk,
right?
obviously.
And so yeah, Alan Gorey, Ani McIntyre, Molly Duncan, Michael Rosen, Roger Ball, and Robbie McIntosh were the original guys. And they originally had kind of jammed together in and around Scotland. And then they all like separately moved to London in like the early 70s, 71 era. And so Michael Rosen quit and they brought aboard a guitarist singer named Hamish Stewart. And that solidified the lineup of the band. And so they hadn't really seen each other since they moved from Scotland to London. And so they went to a Traffic concert and like they all happened to be there. And so they were like, oh, like we should probably try to jam music together like we used to in Scotland. And so they started kind of playing around London. And in 1972, I believe it was, or 3, they backed Chuck Berry when he went to London and recorded My Ding-a-Ling. Which is like a kind of a famous corny Chuck Berry song, but they then word was getting around that they were a really good band, and so Bonnie Bramlett had them be her backing band on her solo record from 1973, which is then what kind of got them discovered. And so one story suggests that like a friend heard them playing in London and said, that's too much for the average white man. And that's how they kind of got the name. And then another story says that Bonnie Bramlett was the one that told them they should call themselves the Average White Band. And so in 1973, they were lucky enough to get the opening slot for Eric Clapton on his comeback concert, which was like, you know what I mean? That's a pretty big gig for a band that at that time, they had only released one record. And so...
so that's like, what, like 74-ish?
73.
73, okay.
Yeah.
Is that the Rainbow Bridge?
which I don't know if that's what they're referring it to. They just listed it as Eric Clapton's 73 comeback concert, which is crazy to think that people thought Eric Clapton was washed up in 1973. They're like, he needs a comeback
on Smack,
concert.
maybe.
He was.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, that was, he kind of went into his own exile of his own making there for about a year and a half or so. But yeah, he was really only out of the scene for about 2.5 years. But anyway,
yeah. Their first album, that one, it's just AWB, Average White Band, self-titled. It's got a white cover with a drawing, which became their logo of the band, which is a woman sitting like naked with her back, and it makes the W.
The derriere.
Yeah, the derriere. And so that album had probably their biggest hit, called Pick Up the Pieces.
Right.
And they had like started touring on those songs before that album like officially dropped, and that song became #1, because that didn't happen until 1975. Well, unfortunately, in 1974, but right before the song got huge, they were like, at this point in Hollywood, they had moved to LA. And so like they're playing, and like Elton John's showing up every night, and like Jack Nicholson, and like it was like a big thing. They were becoming a really big band. And they went to a party that Cher and Greg Allman were having. And 24-year-old Robbie McIntosh, who a lot of people say was like the linchpin of the band, he was the drummer. And like people were saying he was like one of the funkiest white drummers they'd ever heard in their life, for whatever that, is worth. But like that was one of the draws to the band. Like Elton John wanted to record with Robbie McIntosh, on drums. Well, he ODs at this party that Cher and Greg Allman have, and he ends up dying. And Alan Gorey, the bass player, he also ODs. But Cher, I guess, kept him conscious till like the EMTs arrived. And so it was like a huge, kick in the nuts to the band, obviously.
Jesus.
Whereas like Pick Up the Pieces, when they recorded it originally, was like, talking about, either like picking up a girl or having a good time partying or something. But like it literally turned into like they were having to like pick up the pieces of the band because the drummer, who was like the main force of the band, dies. And then the bass player, lead singer, or one of the lead singers, he almost dies as well. And it was a really crazy time for them. So they didn't know, at first what they were going to do. So, but they continued on because they felt that was what he would want them to do. And so, like I said, Pick Up the Pieces becomes like a huge radio hit, and it's just funky instrumental, radio hit is,
even if like the listeners don't know the song by name, you play like 5 seconds of the song, you'll hear it. It's been sampled so much too.
Oh yeah. They were sampled by like Ice Cube, Too Short, Eric B. and Rakim, the Beastie Boys, Public Enemy, TLC. Who else? Like a bunch of rap artists have sampled Average White Band. And in a funny little kind of like nod of the cap, the JBs, which was James Brown's backup band, in 1975 they released like a response song called "Pick Up the Pieces One at a Time." Just kind of like as a tip of the hat and a tribute to the Average White Band. And they released it as the name of their band was the AABB, the Above Average Black Band.
Well played, guys.
Yeah.
And so later in 1975, they released their next album, Cut the Cake, which was really popular as well. It didn't have near the record or the radio hits, as that first album. But one other interesting record that they made in 1976, they collaborated with Benny King for an entire record, which is Benny King was, those at home, he sang Stand By Me, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
If it's the same Benny King.
Did you get a chance to
And,
listen to that one, Levi? I did. I got to
heard a
listen to
couple
like
songs
3
off
of their
it.
records today.
Yeah, it's not bad.
I bet.
No.
Yeah.
Honestly, I have a couple of I have the record. They released a record before the first self-titled record on MCA, and I think it's called Show Your Hand, and it has almost the same exact songs as that first album, but I believe there's 1 or 2 that are different. And I listen to it all the time. It's one of my favorite, just like throw on a record while I'm doing something kind of a record.
It'll get you moving, for sure.
Oh, yeah. The Average White Band definitely gets you in a funky groove, for sure. One interesting thing is, so in 1983, they kind of had their first major breakup of that original lineup, minus the drummer who had passed. And Hamish Stewart left and played with Chaka Khan, which I thought was a really neat thing. Like, he got into her band, which then I guess was seen by Paul McCartney. And so Hamish Stewart from the Average White Band played guitar and bass. It depended on what Paul was playing for like multiple tours with Paul McCartney in the late 80s and early 90s. So, the Average White Band, I think, is just one of those groups that, like you said, people may think they've never heard of them, but as soon as they hear the first 10 or 15 seconds of that song, they'll realize they probably heard them. But they're a band that once you dive into it, you're like, wow, man, they had a bunch of really grooving tunes.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting to think where they maybe would have gone had that drummer not passed away, because I think it kind of did, they stayed together for another, 8 years or so after that, but it was just never the same after that. The quality of the music, they were really tight.
Yeah. And in the 70s too, that's a band that just oozes 70s, so it was probably a little bit more challenging to transition to the 1980s.
I mean, the only way Chicago got away with it is, they became like a Peter Cetera pop band.
Yeah, right. Good, right. The power ballads.
You can't really think of any of those bands that went from being like the Tower of Power or Average White Band or how Chicago originally was.
Mm-hmm.
None of those bands were able to push that sound into the 80s, really.
Right.
Which is a shame.
It's interesting that you mentioned that too. All those bands that you just mentioned, like Tower of Power and Chicago and Average White Band, with the exception of Average White Band had one African American or one Scottish black guy in the band. It's like white boy funk. And the reason I bring that up is kind of funny, quick anecdote. I saw Fish over the weekend, a couple nights, and I went the first night with someone who he's dating one of Steph's college friends, and obviously she's really into Fish too, and he's not. It was his first show, but he's also a musician, and he's really knowledgeable about music. Just older stuff and new, and he's got a band as well too. So he was there. It was his first time, and like about set break, I'm like, so what do you think, dude? This is your first show. There's a lot to take in. He's like, yeah, I don't mind it. He's like, it's basically just white guys playing funk, right? And I said, yeah, kind of. I guess it is. Right? So yeah, on that note, yeah, topical. But yeah, no, it's interesting because they were early funk pioneers, but from a very unlikely place,
Right? Yeah. You wouldn't think.
Yeah.
And especially for that drummer, like I said, he died when he was only 24.
Right.
And so he had been playing in funk bands in Scotland and England for years already. So it's crazy that music there's truly no boundaries.
Sure.
If the music can make its way somewhere, people will consume it. And usually there's always someone that it touches and it changes their life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like soul music obviously touched those guys' lives. And
Absolutely.
It made our lives all the better because we got the Average White Band out of it.
It's good stuff, man. I have to admit, I hadn't really listened to like a lot of their LPs start to finish, until you told us you were going to induct them. And so I listened today. I was kind of working from home today. Well, the kids are daycare, so I had some time to play music a little bit louder than I normally do. And yeah, man, I listened to the first 3 LPs, and they were all just the first 3 big LPs, from the 70s. They were all just choice, man. So good work. Yeah. I'm gonna, if it's okay if I take the second one, because I think Jonathan's inductee, we all really have a shared experience with them. But the reason I want to take the next one, the segue, is because I also have a Cher connection, all right, with this group. Levi had mentioned, unfortunately, this fatal party at Cher and Greg Allman's place. And also, we've got an Allman's connection later,
right.
too. Guys, what do you know, huh? This was not planned, everyone. But anyway, back in 1978, when this band was already sort of established, Cher, who would have been actually post Greg Allman, she would have been with Gene Simmons at the time, I believe, 1978. Cher saw this band perform in San Francisco and was really taken by them and had them appear on her TV show at the time. And if you guys get a chance to ever watch the footage from that Cher TV special from 1978, it is Mondo Bizarre. Okay. So yeah, the fact that this was like on network TV in 1978 is pretty crazy. It's trippy as hell. It's a song of theirs, about smoking, and like there's just cigarettes everywhere. It's just weird. Just watch it. Is all I gotta know. It's Cher and the band that she hosted on her show and also performed with. It's more of like it's a skit / musical performance. The band I'm talking about is the Tubes. The Tubes, as I mentioned, are a San Francisco band formed in the early 1970s. Most people have certainly heard one Tube song, and that song is in no way indicative of the strength of their material, although I don't think it's a bad song for what it is. The song She's a Beauty from 1983, from the
it's on every dad rock compilation ever made.
Right, and I was thinking when I narrowed in on the Tubes as my selection, I thought of another band, guys, that also, and they're not similar musically to the Tubes, that also like has that like 80s song that everybody knows, but most people don't know their awesome catalog from the previous decade, the Jay Giles Band. Right?
For sure.
I mean, you listen to like everybody's like, oh yeah, Centerfold, it's like rewind a few years. Jay Giles Band 70 stuff kicks ass, and it's not indicative of what the 80s stuff was, what they could do, although it was their commercial breakthrough. They were veteran artists. Quite frankly, they probably needed the breakthrough, because it's certainly kind of almost local acts before that. Jay Giles in Boston, the Tubes in San Francisco. So yeah, it's just the parallels, I think, to the success that they had in the 80s, despite being putting out their best material in the 70s, I thought was kind of striking. But anyway, so yeah, the Tubes really are like, think of it this way, right? Think of like guerrilla street theater, right, which was popular in San Francisco in like the late 60s. All these weird mimes and shit, and all that, right?
I almost like their early stuff to like Fire Sign Theater, but they gave like more shit about the music too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's really like campy humor meets stage act meets.
Oh yeah, it's just.
But like the music is pretty solid. They were a surprisingly tighter band in the 70s, I think, than what people think.
Oh, absolutely.
Like I think some people got caught up into the whole shtick of it all,
Yeah.
But like they could play.
Right. I mean, the theatrical performances got them noticed. That's how Cher noticed them.
Yeah.
When she saw them in '78, they had a minor song, White Punks on Dope, from their first LP, which is a great song. And certainly one of the best song titles ever, which I thought was funny. They were theatrical. They were known for all these big theatrical performances, kind of following in the footsteps of somebody even like David Bowie,
or like kind of Genesis, but with more Genesis, of a comedy influence.
Right, but more of a exactly, more of a comedy, and there were comedy elements like the folks at like National Lampoon's Kentucky Fried Movie, some of the other kind of street performer, or well, not street performers necessarily, but like kind of comedy
groundlings and like
comedy
like SCTV
of the '70s. Yeah, like they have that vibe to them. It seems like the Tubes were always in on the joke. They were like really this band of misfits, and I feel like the Tubes really, for a brief period there, I think they kind of hijacked rock and roll, and I mean the hijacking as a term of endearment. Some of what came before them, they had a little bit of that. I wasn't surprised to hear that there was an Alice Cooper connection, because just in terms of producers, Alice Cooper's original drummer, his name's Gary something. I forgot. It's Gary Speen, I think, or Spleen, I think is his last name. He ended up producing the Tubes' first record, and he was the one that was like kind of really fighting for them. Got like Bill Graham to notice him, and there was actually a contest, or not a contest, but this guy kind of issued a challenge to Bill Graham, like, what do you want? You need to start promoting the Tubes. There's all these people around San Francisco think they're really cool and kind of crazy, and Bill Graham like didn't really like them, I guess, or like wasn't that impressed with it. And he's like, okay, so if they can sell out like 3 nights at one of the venues I work with, I'll let him pick the opening bill for any act that any show that I promote, right? So sure enough, they sold out 3 nights, and the Tubes got to pick, and they opened for Led Zeppelin at Kezar Stadium. I think like around like mid '70s, at the height of Zeppelin's popularity, So the Tubes always seem to be kind of pulling one over on somebody, which I liked. They were certainly this band of kind of merry pranksters. Mm-hmm. Continuing the long tradition of San Francisco weirdos, these were kind of, it was, and just when I got to thinking, one of the Tubes members who I think we talked about before we started recording, and this is how I discovered the Tubes. In college, I'm listening to the Grateful Dead a lot, and Levi's giving me bootlegs too and things like that, and this guy that played with the Dead in the '90s, who got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with them in 1994, Vince Welnick, right? I didn't know when I was listening to those Dead shows from the early '90s. This guy's got like a whole past, with this really weird group, called the Tubes. So that's kind of what turned me on to him. I learned that Vince Welnick was in the group. And I heard him, and I was like, "Wow, this is really interesting stuff." And I didn't start listening to him more heavily until more recently. But yeah, that's how I discovered the Tubes, and maybe some people that are in the Dead as well. But it kind of, and then I was like, "Well, wait a minute, how did this guy go from the Tubes to playing with the Grateful Dead?" But if you think about some of the other elements I've discussed already, San Francisco, right, sort of counterculture, the Dead kind of, embodied a lot of the '60s, like the we decade, where everybody's, smoking weed and playing in parks and, all that shit. And then, you go to the '70s, which most people consider the me decade, right? And it makes sense. The Tubes were sort of, if you listen to a lot of their lyrics, it's it's kind of an attack on consumer culture, which was happening abundantly in the '70s. It's like, '60s are over, Vietnam's over, everybody's got to make money, do cocaine, and, like we got to make our music dancier, and, and like the Tubes like kind of embraced that. But at the same time, like I said earlier, they were in on the joke. It's like I don't know, it's like, to me, it's like the Tubes, because I think a lot of the lyrics are still pertinent today, even if the technology's changed. You look at their 1979 album, produced by Todd Rundgren. And this is actually, I think, my favorite of their records. It's not their most well known, but it's a concept album about this prodigy that's like raised by a television. All right. Todd Rundgren produced it, Remote Control from 1979. You know, you replace the technology, and the lyrics are still really poignant and pertinent and funny and strangely and eerily, you know, topical now. So to me, it was always like the Tubes got this memo from the future that nobody else was in on, you know, and they really broadcast their vision of this kind of dystopian, well, this scary kind of surveillance, consumer culture, you know, all those other things that are just sort of in circulation with technology in the 70s and now. They kind of dove into it laughing all the way, you know. And if you watch some of their performances, you know, I mentioned it's like guerrilla theater meets like Space Oddity, also meets like total S&M bondage as well.
Yeah.
You know, like if you watch Fee Waybill, who was the lead singer of the Tubes, you know, the guy puts on like full bondage outfits. Even today, like in his late 60s, early 70s, he'll still wear like, you know, assless pants, you know, for a couple songs and stuff. So, you know, they're still having a lot of fun. But anyway, you know, to me, I mentioned the 3 albums that really stand out. I actually say 4 for them. I think their first record all the way up to Remote Control is all great. So that's like 75 to 79. They got 4 LPs. They were cranking them out. They've got a 1977 one called Now that is really good. And then 1979's Remote Control, produced by Todd Rundgren, is my favorite. So I would start with their first record, as well as any of those 4 that I mentioned. Young and Rich, I think, is the one from 1976. Their second LP is great as well. And then all of that catalog and all those antics from the 70s and even being on Cher's TV show, all of that aside, most people only know them from one song, you know, from She's a Beauty, you know, which gets put on compilations with like Rock Me Amadeus, you know, and like, you know, it gets this really term, you know, this one-hit wonder term, which describes a lot of bands that I like a lot. So I find it to be kind of a derisive term. But the Tubes seemed sort of well-equipped for the 80s because they were using a lot of technology pretty early. You know, like a lot of synthesizers on their 70s record. So they transitioned to the 80s really well. I heard a quote, somebody said that, you know, the Tubes started making music videos even before MTV. Yeah. And somebody's like, they were pioneers. They were just too early, you know, is what somebody said.
Yeah, I believe they made like a video to accompany their like 1978 record.
Right. Yeah, they made
which
like
is like people weren't doing that
video. Yeah, they really embraced the music video medium much earlier than it had a platform in MTV. But then when MTV came around, you know, they were She's a Beauty was MTV ready. You know, it's poppy, it's catchy.
The video has like campiness to it, though.
Oh yeah,
while they made the sound more accessible, they didn't lose their like campiness or kitschiness.
Yeah, right. No, I don't think so. It was still fun, but and still kind of like a joke, you know. When they entered the 80s, it's. Their time in that decade was I thought well spent, even if it was limited, and it's kind of unfortunately sort of what, even though they play today, you know, is sort of with a 3 of the 5 people, three people that they had from the heyday, that kind of tore them apart. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's like the commercial success in the long run hurt them more than it helped them. In the short term, it was good. Got him on MTV. 1983, I mentioned David Bowie. They were the opening act for Bowie in 1983 on his biggest tour to date. It was, I forgot what it's called, the 1983 Bowie tour. This can be found out. Peter Gabriel opened some shows too. But yeah, the Tubes played first. which was fitting, because you've also got really weird artists from the 70s and Gabriel and Bowie transitioning to this new decade where, everybody's things are a little leaner and a little more economic when it comes to music. So, economic in the sound. I mean, the economic.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was kind of, from what I read, what broke them up really was they, after the album 1980 from that She's a Beauty's on from '83, which was huge. It was a top 10 hit. The song was. The Capitol Records had a bunch of layoffs, and like some of the people that were kind of fighting for the Tubes got laid off. So they released an album called Love Bomb, which commercially didn't do as well. And it really just kind of fall apart after that. You had one faction of the group that kind of appreciated the more oddball things they were doing in the 70s. And then you had a new faction, another faction of the group that was like, let's keep pressing this more pop-oriented sound that we had on She's a Beauty. So that kind of really drove them apart. They've reunited since then. And then obviously, like I mentioned, Vince Welnick, strangely enough, joined the Grateful Dead after the Tubes broke up for a little while, and then they've been playing off and on. I think since like the late '90s. So with Fee Waybill,
I had a chance to see
Prince.
Vince Welnick solo in the early 2000s once.
Uh-huh.
And he was really good, but he was you could tell he was sick or
He's a guy that certainly had some demons,
Yeah, he ended up killing himself in 2006.
He did. Yeah. So certainly a guy that faced his struggles. But yeah, quite a this whole other life that he had before the Grateful Dead, I find really fascinating.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's interesting to see how that
actually when they what was the first tour they did after Jerry died? Was it the Other Ones or something? Was that what they were called themselves?
96, the Other Ones, something like that. Yeah.
He was like pretty hurt that they didn't ask him. I mean, granted, he had only been in the band like 5 years, but like he had played every live show basically.
And him and Jerry were close, from what I read too.
And so yeah, he was that. I think that hurt him a lot more than what people knew.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've got this, ubiquitous, lucrative legacy that's been built now for what? Jerry Garcia's been dead for 23 years, 24 years.
Oh yeah.
He wasn't a part of it. You know what I mean? He's not a part of these post Jerry riches that everybody else is doing quite well on. And that's not a knock, whatever. They made the music too. But yeah, I think you're right, Levi. I think I'd read, from what I've read, that was quite a blow to him to not really be part of the family, so to speak, after.
Well,
after,
I'm obviously no psychiatrist or anything like that, but like you could sense almost a sadness to him when I saw him play live.
Well, that's going to take its toll not only on your emotions but your pocketbook as well. I mean,
yeah.
So yeah. But anyway, yeah. So if you're check out Vince Welnick's previous band, the Tubes. They're my inductee. They're also in the film Xanadu with Olivia Newton-John as well. So I want to give a shout out. I didn't get to watch nearly as much as I wanted, but there's a YouTube channel called Tubes Project, which has collected a lot of old footage, even some shows from '75 when they played like the Fillmore and the Winterland. Up until some of the TV appearances in the 80s as well. Like they were on Solid Gold once as well. They turned down Saturday Night Live because they wouldn't let them play long enough, I guess. So yeah, they stuck to their guns, I think, most of the time. So yeah, the Tubes, my inductee, kind of long-winded there, but they're an important piece of rock history that deserves much more recognition. So the Tubes, you're a Choo-In now.
Well done. So to segue then to my pick, this is very much has to do with my personal history of rock and roll and how I experienced it. And to do that, I think you first have to set the scene as I was 18 or 19 years old in the late 90s, and up to that point, mainly stuck with, the Pearl Jam and Allman Brothers Band and Eric Clapton and Neil Young and STP and kind of stuck around that scene in terms of both recorded albums and going to see concerts. And so as a result, mostly going to arena shows, basketball arenas or amphitheaters up to that point. And so that was my live experience. And these, like I said, the newer bands of, in the 90s, they had these like this blue chip influence, whether it be the Who or Zeppelin. And so it was really obvious segues to, oh yeah, well, these bands are easily accessible on the aforementioned WYMG. And so, those years as a teenager collecting albums, it was fairly straightforward. And speaking of, the Allman Brothers Band, there was a kind of a renaissance of the Allman Brothers Band in the late 80s. Mm-hmm. And as I grew to learn more about this band, particularly with Where It All Begins, their album from 1994, which I really latched onto, and the two subsequent live albums that were released, first set and second set, I believe. I learned more about a couple of the newer members of the Allman Brothers Band, those being Warren Haynes on guitar and Alan Woody on bass, and mainly because Warren's songwriting credits were littered throughout these newer records from the Allman Brothers Band from the previous 7 or 8 years. And then Alan Woody really stuck out because I believe there was a concert video, an Allman Brothers concert video, where he's playing an 18-string bass, and that, as an 18-year-old, you see that, it just kind of blows your mind. So anyway, these two guys team up with a drummer named Matt Apps, who I believe worked with Dickie Betts, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. And so they formed this side project called Gov't Mule. And this was a unique circumstance to learn about a band. Essentially, they're these young guys in this very accomplished band, and one of the most recognized rock and roll bands of all time, and they're kind of doing their own thing at the same time. So this was very intriguing, right? And at the same time, it was this music that they were creating was a spinoff of these blues and jazz genres that they were something I respected, but those genres in their rawest form didn't grab me as much as rock and roll did, and this kind of that current state of the evolution of rock and roll, which I think is still a thing that people ignore too often because rock and roll is still so young, yet it evolves so much over a short period of time. And so I had really latched onto this, 90s rock and roll, and tried to dabble in things like a Muddy Waters album. And while I appreciated the Muddy Waters album, it wasn't something that I was going back to repeatedly. Right. But I very much respected it. But
it's easier to appreciate who they influence sometimes more than the originator. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And to understand their the influence on Gov't Mule, and how they turned it into their own sound, this hard blues and rock that for lack of a better word, updated the sounds I had already loved in being, the Allman Brothers Band or Led Zeppelin. It was this perfect melding of musical genres and evolution of these genres that took it to another level, and with their Right, there were essentially rumors about Gov't Mule before I had really heard them, and so I distinctly remember I got rained out at work one day. I was working construction, and we got rained out one afternoon, and so I decided to go into Springfield and go to Best Buy, and I picked up both their debut album and Live at the Roseland Ballroom. And so this is probably 98. So those albums have been out for a few years already. And to hear these albums with songs like Mule and these extended cuts in the studio, both hard rocking songs and some very, very introspective slower paced songs that is kind of a hallmark of Warren Haynes' songwriting. It added something to my record collection that I hadn't had before, and so I was excited to finally see these guys live, because they now I did look at my Setlist FM stats, and the first time I saw them was I believe at Riverport Amphitheater, because it was part of a festival, but
probably Horde Festival, I think.
Horde Fest, yeah.
Would it have been like the Dose tour or the first album?
Yeah, it'd been like 98 or so, I think.
Yeah, I'm frantically signing into my Setlist FM account right now, and but subsequent shows were at places like Mississippi Nights, which is a tiny club on the riverfront in St. Louis.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, right. It was July of 98 was the first show at Riverport, and then March of incidentally, it was March of 99 was the first show that I saw at the Vic. So it was a theater, a nice sized theater in Chicago, before those Mississippi Nights shows. So, but what I'm getting at was the idea that this was a band that presented the opportunity to see these guys up close and personal. The Allman Brothers Band were, they were headlining at Riverport,
right.
And meanwhile, these guys, Warren and Alan and Matt, they were playing 3 feet away from you on a stage, that's not much bigger than your office, and just blowing you away with this.
Oh yeah, well, and especially at Mississippi Nights, because that place, man, that place could get on fire, man. Not just the heat of all the people.
Yeah, a lot of body
heat. Man, that was some of the best shows I ever saw there. Those 2 Gov't Mule shows there. I was lucky enough we saw Blue Floyd there. Mississippi Nights, man, had some good shows.
Yeah, and the floor was conducive to it, because it was a bit more confined on the floor. You would step down, and there was limited space right up there up against the stage. And so learning the thrill of the club show as a result is what the Mule offered me. And it was like this overpowering intimacy, because it was right there. It was in your face. I should have been wearing earplugs. I was not. Still regret it. But in the moment, you really enjoy it. And so in the set list, so this was the beginning of my venture into the jam band scene, as it were, and so you expected things like arrows and set lists, and this is when one song leads into another, and the Mule offered this, but it felt a little bit different than what I was familiar with, whether it could be a Dead show or even a Widespread Panic show, where a lot of times it's pretty even keeled. And yeah, you have your dynamic ups and downs. But the Mule shows seem to offer more of a narrative, in my opinion. And they would often start with something, heavily a cappella. Where mainly vocals, minimal guitar, maybe Alan Woody on mandolin for the first song, and Matt Apps just kind of sitting back, and then that would bust into something much more aggressive. And
they know how to do a slow burn, definitely.
Oh man, oh geez, and yeah, and that might turn into some 17-minute version of Mule that has 3 or 4 other teases inside of it. And so this is what I felt was a narrative that I really latched onto in their concerts, and this was loud, and it was aggressive, heavily blues influenced, as I said, and as a result, I felt like it offered a line of demarcation in the jam band scene, and that's a good way to put it. Yeah. That this was there were the people that you would not necessarily see at all the concerts you go to, but you knew the scene, you knew the type of people that, much like yourself, that were going to these concerts, whether it be Widespread Panic or the Black Crowes or there were many more at the time. But the Mule wasn't really for everybody, and that made it all the more enjoyable because there would be a lot of people who enjoyed the other bands that you were also listening to, but didn't like Mule, and I was down with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when I played them to some of my Fish loving friends, when I first started turning on to them, not everybody latched onto it. It had
it's too heavy for.
Yeah, it had too much hair on its chest for him, Yeah,
and whether it be like Warren's vocals or the very dark undertones of his lyrics, Warren was somebody who kind of wrote from this shell, and it wasn't quite as abstract, this kind of, I'm not going to say nonsensical abstract, but it was. A lot of music and lyrics from that time were so abstract that you're like, I have no fucking idea what that's about. Right. But it sounded like non-threatening,
Yeah. I mean, like Jerry Garcia was an influence on the guy, but so was Tony Iommi, Sure. I mean, so yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
And physically, the Mule were these imposing figures, with Warren and Alan, and being right there in your face as when you're watching them at Mississippi Nights, but they were completely approachable. They were. It was funny to hear Alan talk for the first time from stage, where you see these photos of him, but obviously he doesn't sing backup. And then you would go to a show, and finally Alan speaks up in the middle of the show. He's like, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight.
Right. He does have an interesting voice. Yeah.
He had this unexpectedly high pitch in his voice, and so it just it was totally disarming in a way. And then of course Warren is very approachable. We would hang out after shows, and they were like, come on, let's get a photo, and a
Southern gentleman if there ever was one.
Absolutely. So, but then to get back to the sound, the Mule, it could be like it sounded like a tornado. You would in the movies or a cartoon, there would be a tornado going, and there'd be like a rocking chair in it, and a piano and things, And so I think that's how I visualize the Mule sound, is this tornado, and there's a guitar in there, and there's a bass in there, and there's the drums in there, and at any given moment you could either just hone in, you could just watch and hear the guitar, or just the bass, or just the drums, or you could just appreciate the tornado for this massive thing that was standing right there in front of you.
The cacophony of sound.
Oh my God. And like I said, transitioning from blues to jazz, and back, and to straightforward, at times just pop songwriting, was something that I felt was unique to them, both in that genre and in the rock and roll scene as a whole. And Warren's range and styles and techniques as a guitarist, was totally tantamount to this sound working, because he had so much influence from all these various genres of music, and he could execute it. And
they were, even when Alan was still alive, they were not afraid to cover pretty much any style of music. If it was a song they liked, it seemed like. And they've carried that on through,
They ripped, dude. You ever heard their version of "When Doves Cry"?
Oh yeah,
dude.
Dude, I've heard them cover the Bee Gees. And they were unafraid to put those influences on display. No matter how incongruous they might seem, Radiohead. They've covered four different Pearl Jam songs,
right?
And you know,
sometimes
and while
Salvation, right? They covered the Crows.
Salvation. Yeah, I mean, they would do this thing where they would cover contemporary artists, which was something very common in the 70s. You know, you know, Rod Stewart would, you know, singing Paul McCartney songs during concerts, and then that kind of stopped in the 80s and most of the night. Then the Mule's like, no, we're going to play these songs that, you know, just got huge either, you know, recently or in the near past. But really for me, you know, at the core, it was the jazz influence of the Mule that influence kind of held my attention. Songs like Birth of the Mule, and because while I appreciate jazz, I'm by no means an aficionado, and I kind of have a hard time knowing where to start at that age, but they brought this sound. It's like, oh, okay, like you know, this mix of jazz and rock, and that was something that I really latched onto, and was a theme throughout their shows as well. And so it was all of these things that created this band that you know, had their debut album. That's self-titled, right? Album. Yeah. And then Dose, which is my personal favorite record, and Life Before Insanity, which is the last record that Alan Woody appeared on. And I think all of those are very good studio records. I think Dose and Life Before Insanity are the better of the three. You know, well written music, well tracked, and I think that Life Before Insanity was an interesting shift in the music. You know, they started to bring in some keyboards on that record that would be part of their band after Alan Woody died, and would always be a part of this.
Yeah, they've been a 4-piece ever since.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what you know, Gov't Mule has been to me. They've since released several more studio albums and played hundreds and hundreds of shows. I think they prolific 60 or 70 shows a year. Yeah, it's unbelievable. So
with Warren Haynes holding down a position and for a little while, 3 bands at one time?
I once saw Warren Haynes play 8 hours in one day, 2 hours for Gov't Mule, and then 3 hours with the Allman Brothers and 3 hours with Phil Lesh and Friends, which was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, wow.
So yeah, I'm saying all this. You guys have equal opinions and experience with the Mule, so I'll let you guys chime in.
Important to me, you know, less so now. You know, I have to admit, as I think I maybe have said on this show before, the loss of Alan, I never necessarily, as a Mule fan, so to speak, recovered from it, in the sense that I respect, obviously, them carrying on, and that's great, and they've I guess evolved since then. But yeah, you know, that was probably one of the biggest losses of my me as a music fan, was certainly when he passed away in 2000.
We were all in on the Mule when he
that was I was so into him. All three of us, you know, were knee deep in Mule, and then to lose him like in the middle of it was difficult for me, and I just, it hasn't been the same for me since. I respect what they do, and I certainly think they can still put on a good live show. But gosh, you know, they exist as that power trio to me. You know, that's the ideal Mule, and obviously, you know, I'm sure they probably wanted to keep it that way as well, but that's just not how it goes.
Do you think it would have stayed? They would have stayed a power trio?
I don't know. Maybe not.
If Alan hadn't died.
You know, I didn't think about Life Before Insanity having.
It does have
some of those layers and the keys as well that previous records, the previous couple LPs didn't. So yeah, who knows? They may have. You know, but they could have been already in discussion that they were going to bring in Danny Lewis. You know, I don't know. but I guess I kind of discovered them around the same time as you. I remember I read about them in an issue of Relics magazine, which I don't read it anymore, but I'm still glad to see it's still going. But yeah, I read about them like right when I bought this issue of Relics like right before I started college, and it was like I got it at like Barnes and Noble, and it wasn't even the current one. It was like from a couple months earlier. And within it, they were reviewing a Black Crowes concert. And at the time, this would have been like 97, I was really getting into the Black Crowes. And there was a review. Gov't Mule opened up for the Black Crowes for most of their fall 96 tour. Okay. And they would come out and play with the Crowes, etc. So I was into the Crowes, so I heard about, I read this article, and they were talking. They were whoever wrote the review was really praising the Mule, a lot. And so then I got to college like a couple weeks later, and I was like, well, I'm going to check them out. I'm going to get, and sure enough, the record stores didn't have them, any of their stuff. So I went to this record store called Rockin' Robins that isn't in Macomb anymore. There's probably about 900 record stores across the country called Rockin' Robins as well. But anyway, I went in there, I told the cat that was working there about them, and he hadn't heard them either, but he sounded intrigued. So he ordered it for me, and then it's like pre-Amazon, even like 2 weeks later it got there, I had to wait 2 weeks. So 2 weeks I order live at the Roseland Ballroom that Jonathan mentioned, which is a live recording from actually when they opened up for Blues Traveler at the Roseland Ballroom in 95-ish, 95, 96, something like that. And the guy at the record store had ordered a copy as well. He's like, oh, you talking about him kind of piqued my interest. I ordered it too, and we put it on right there in the record store.
Nice.
We fucking cranked it, right? So the first track is that Train, the instrumental, and about 3/4 of the way through that, they tease St. Stephen, which was really, Black Crowes, Gov't Mule, Grateful Dead, all, it's all kind of coalescing for an 18-year-old me at the time, I was like, whoa, look at they ripped St. Stephen, they totally just like kicked it up a notch. And I brought it back, and I started playing that for some of my sort of more jam band oriented friends in college, and they liked the St. Stephen tease, but they didn't like the rest of it, right?
They didn't like the rapper.
Yeah, right. They didn't like the rest of it, But I was always, like Jonathan mentioned, this line of demarcation, he phrased it, which I think is a good way, because they were them and the Crowes, to a lesser degree, were kind of the harder acts within that scene, so to speak. So I always thought they stood out in the best possible way. Among stuff that was a little more sort of flowery. So I heard them then, and I was hooked ever since. I saw them quite a few times, and it was a brief period, like 97 to 2000 that I was into them. But man, I was really into them.
Yep.
Let's put it that way. Yeah, I was really into them. It was like the Almonds meet Sabbath. I mentioned Tony Iommi earlier. That's what it sounded like to me when people asked me. Because I was aside from you guys, I was one of the first people of my friends, at least at college as well, that started listening to them. Most people didn't know who they were when I started talking about them in '97. And people were like, "What do they sound like?" I was like, "Well, they sound like the Allman Brothers meets Black Sabbath." And people are like, "Oh, that sounds weird," or "I'm not going to like that." I'm like, "Just listen to it," So yeah. And I think that harder edge is how they gain the respect of such a wide group of fans. Like Metallica, like Hetfield, he went apeshit over the Mule, like when they first came out. Like he loved them, still does, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, when you look back at those, the two Alan Woody posthumous tribute albums, essentially, the Deep End Volume 1 and 2, the musicians on that are unparalleled. I mean, I can't think of any other records that were made in such a fashion, with such a variety of artists, and that speaks a lot to the respect that these artists had for what the Mule was doing.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, they pulled in, people like Entwistle and Chris Squire and, Flea and so that Rising Low documentary, right, and the Deep End, so good, they're great, man.
My bonus little teaser here, Gabe. How does Kiss and Gov't Mule, how are they related?
I believe that Michael Barberio, I think is his. I might be mispronouncing his last name. I want to say he produced a Kiss record, and he also produced a couple Gov't Mule records.
Possibly that could be true, but
I could be wrong. I could be wrong on that. I know. I know Michael Barberio produced a couple Tesla records.
When Peter Criss left Kiss, he hooked up with a guy named Stan Penridge.
I've heard the name.
They had this band called the Chris Penridge Alliance.
Oh, yeah.
And so the backing band was these four guys who had been playing in and around Nashville in a jazz rock fusion band called Montage. And that bass player was Alan Woody.
No shit.
And so
I didn't know that.
If you type in the Chris Penridge Alliance at YouTube, they recorded a bunch of demos, and so you can hear Alan Woody playing bass for Peter Criss.
Sweet.
And they toured and did probably a dozen shows as that band, and I just think that's a really weird link. I never knew that until the research for this episode.
Yeah, nice. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Yeah. Wow. I'd heard of the Chris Penridge Alliance, but I didn't know who was involved or anything like that other than the two namesakes. But yeah, that's cool. I might be wrong on the Michael Barberio thing. I thought for some reason he'd maybe produced like a Kiss record, like Hot in the Shade or something like that, but I could be wrong. But anyway, cool.
So some quick stats on the Mule. They've played 600 songs more than once in their touring. They've played 147 songs at least 50 times. And 235 songs at least 20 times. That is quite. I mean, that just goes to show that, like, on any given night, you just don't know what you're gonna hear.
Absolutely.
And so they're kind of known for their covers in a way. Over the last 15 years, they've really. I'm not going to say gained a following, but it's always interesting to see what they're gonna play. But one of the covers early on in the Mule sets, something called Young Mule Blues, which was this almost mashup before mashups of several songs, and so it'd be wrapped in Young Man Blues, and they would insert of various other teases within that song. And so I asked you guys to give your favorite Mule covers if you had considered it, and so I would consider that along with the Allman Brothers Band cover of Kind of Bird, which is a great jazz tune, and I threw out Pearl Jam's Indifference in there as well as one of my favorite covers of theirs.
Yeah, very nice.
I don't have necessarily three, but one that sticks out the most with me is because I was there. It was at the show we were at, and Warren had came out as everybody was lined up to get into Mississippi Nights. Warren came by and was talking to people on the street, just shaking hands with people and talking. And I said something like, "Hey, Mississippi Nights, how about some Mississippi Queen?" And in the middle of the first or second song, which was "Don't Step on the Grass," he busts into Mississippi Queen, and we were basically front row. So I just lock eyes with them. You got to be fucking kidding me.
We actually, Levi's head exploded. Everyone, we had to reconstruct him.
I'm the new. This is the new Paul.
Right, exactly. No, that was just balls out.
That was pretty fucking epic.
Yeah, dude, it was. Yeah, it was killer. Yeah. I think it was from 99, actually. Or was it? Or no, it was from 2000. You're right. Because we all saw them in 99 at Mississippi Nights, too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because they did one of my favorite covers that night, which is on Dose, but they did She Said,
right,
by the Beatles. And they really just put their own spin on it. You know, I mean,
sure, they made that song their own.
They made the song totally their own. And I still listen to that tune a lot. I still put it on quite a bit. It still really just knocks me out. And then they do, they extend it with the Tomorrow Never Knows, another song on Revolver. They created the jam instrumental, that they always tag on to She Said, She Said. So that's one of my favorites. I mentioned, even though it's a tease, like the St. Stephen tease was really cool. To have that sort of be that Train, like I said, was the first song I had heard by them, their instrumental. I don't think is that a cover? It's on their first record, Train.
No, that's an original.
It's theirs. Okay, right. It's an instrumental. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, then to hear that really awesome version of St. Stephen, the tease that they do, and then also I really like their version of "Get Behind the Mule," the Tom Waits song.
Oh yeah,
I think it's pretty badass. I just thought about that one a second ago.
Yeah.
I was like, which is awesome.
Yes.
Their version of that is really cool. Gosh, there's so many others. Those.
It takes more than a hammer and nails to make a house a home. Is one of my favorite openers. Right. Yeah, staple singers. Yeah.
I could go on and on. And they've covered virtually every artist I like.
Being said, their original staples of Mule, Blind Man in the Dark, and Thorazine Shuffle, which they play pretty much every night, are just fucking rip. And dude, I didn't realize that they played Blind Man in the Dark at their first show, so they held on to that for several years before recording it. Yeah. Anyway,
I got a show from '96. At the Cotton Club in Atlanta. I don't know. I probably spun it for you guys. You guys probably have copies of it or heard it. But from the '96, so they were still in the Almonds at that time. Near the end of their time with the Almonds, and it's badass, dude. Mark and Chris come out for Mr. Big, which is another one of my favorite covers they do. And then I think they do Presence of the Lord as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's just, it's awesome. So good stuff. No, it's as good as it gets right there. So I think they do Young You'll Be Loose that night too.
Did they? Nice.
I think with Mark as well.
Nice.
I think
it's hard to keep up on, man. I don't. Just listening to the version from Mississippi Nights that we saw. I think that they played at the one that we were at.
Yeah.
But that it's unbelievable, like the dexterity that they have to have switching from tune to tune and back. It's really something.
I mean, three guys that are so skilled at their instruments, it's like they're like Rush, I mean, like
sure. Yeah,
three dudes that are just like at the top of if you fill out like a top 5 list of like musicians at that instrument, like they're all on it.
Sure.
One other cover before I go, just because like this guy, like obviously when you hear a cover and it gets you into the original band is special. I wasn't that familiar with Humble Pie prior to hearing 30 Days in the Hole. I mean, Humble Pie is awesome, and they've since become a band I really cherish, and just all of Steve Marriott's work really.
I would say I never really listened to him a ton until that Little Help from My Friends CD.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which that cover is amazing. Oh, yeah. With Mark on it too. Yeah. Mark and Warren just.
Is that the album that had War Pigs too?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And Mr. Big's on it too.
Yeah.
I
think that 30 Days went over so well they played it the next New Year's Eve.
Yes.
At the same venue, which is not something that they'll do lightly, to play the same song at the same venue 2 times in a row.
With Oddly Freed the next year too.
Right.
So it's like, all right.
They knew they had something going on there with 30 Days in the Hole.
Yeah. So that one, because that got me into Humble Pie. I really, I didn't know much about Humble Pie prior to hearing them do it. So
yeah. Yep, absolutely. So if you haven't really dug into the Mule, you got to check it out.
Absolutely. They kind of, Jonathan was talking the other day how they were coming to Kansas City. It kind of like talking about them and listening to it in the run up to this episode kind of made me want to see them, one more time, or I don't know, maybe a couple more times, because I've missed it, Yeah.
I saw them probably 5 years ago on the Peoria Riverfront, and they
nice.
were excellent. So
Nice.
they were
Yeah.
played a really killer rockin' horse that night, which is one of my favorite mule tunes.
Gosh, I haven't. Somebody about 10 years ago, somebody gave me a ticket. They played down at Navy Pier, actually, at the Skyline stage, which doesn't really get a lot of shows anymore, but it's one of my favorite spots in the city because you're right on the water, and then you look out, and behind the stage you got the whole city skyline right there. It's pretty picturesque. And they played that. It was like 08 or 09. Somebody gave me a ticket to that, and it was great. Still, at that point I wasn't really listening to them that frequently. Sure. Alan had been gone for almost 10 years at that point. But yeah, I was really impressed. So it's like they can still bring it. So yeah, I'm
definitely.
I would next time they come to Chicago, I'm going to see what I can do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, good choices, everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well done.
Nice to see that. Yeah, and I, as I mentioned, everyone, you can hear all of our previous induction of all the previous artists who are now Choo-Ins. You can find all those archived episodes. We'll post links to those as we promote this episode as well. At rockchoo.com. That's rockchoo, CHOO.com. You can follow us on Instagram and the Twitter at rockinchew. That's in as in no need to suffer. There's no need to suffer a shortage of episodes because they're all at rockchoo.com as well. So you can check us out on YouTube, your favorite Spotify app, your favorite Spotify app. Jesus, Spotify's really taking over. I think it's the one we're not on. Yeah, so don't check that.
Don't check us out on Spotify.
Yeah, right. But yeah, you can check us out on your favorite podcasting apps, Stitcher, Spreaker, however you like. So yeah, check us out however you chew, and then leave us a review as well. Certainly would help us out, and we appreciate the feedback. All right, until next time, we'll see everybody, and next episode is episode 100. Ooh. So we will cook up something delightful for you. All right, guys, have a good night.
Good night.
Peace.